Hello there, welcome to my channel. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the Inkposter, the 13.3 inch model, and see what the latest entry into the e-ink art market looks like. Now, before I start going any deeper, let's set a little bit of groundwork here. So e-ink is a technology that most of us know going back way back to 2007 or so. And we know it as it relates to e-readers. So the Kindle is probably the best example in terms of brand recognition. Over the last few years, we've also started to see ink more prominent in the consumer space as it relates to note-taking. And while this has been happening, e-ink has been really prominent in signage. So that could be things like, bus stop signs, it could be price tags in a supermarket, or even more. E-ink has been working really hard to improve the signage aspect, and it's always been kind of the vision that part of the market they wanted to go for is the home or business market in terms of displaying art. And that's where we find ourselves now. It's taken a while to get here because the color technology for e-ink hasn't really been amenable to putting together a good product. But now we have Spectra 6, which is really good in terms of having about 50,000 or so colors, in terms of having nice vibrancy, especially as it relates to e-ink. Not so much LCDs, but with an e-ink, they can look really good, and the strengths outweigh the weaknesses. And so e-ink art looks really good, and it was time to finally start releasing these devices. So 2025 has been the year of releasing e-ink home devices onto the marketplace. Now, interestingly enough, Inkposter was the first to kind of announce this new consumer category, and they did it in January in the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. Now, the reason why that's interesting is that it's taken them from then till here in the end of September to release their first product. And in the meantime, two other notable entrants into the market have brought their devices for sale. And that started with Reflection Frame, and then it went on to Aluratech, both of which I've done video reviews for as well. So Inkposter ended up being the third major company to release their device, even though they were easily the first in terms of bringing it to market. The interesting aspect of the Inkposter is that they're going for a more premium market. They're selling at a much higher price point and offering a more classic curated art experience. So the fundamental question is, will the Inkposter justify that price point over these other competitors that have already come out, or will it be too expensive for what it delivers? And that's the fundamental questions that we're going to answer in this video review today. So for the rest of this video, we're going to do an unboxing so we can see what the device looks like. We're going to go ahead and take a close look at what the functionality of the app is. Then we're going to look at some images and see how those play out on this device. We'll do my pros and cons of the device, kind of giving what I think are the most notable aspects, both good and bad. And then I'll close it up with my final thoughts on whether the Inkposter might be right for you. All right, let's go ahead and start digging on in. So let's take a quick look at the unboxing and the contents of the Inkposter. This is how the device arrived. Kind of interesting. It has this, plastic outer layer. I've rarely seen packages come with this type of packaging, but it was fine. It was fairly easy to remove. Then you pull that off, and then you see this box, and here's the back of that box. So pretty standard stuff. It's interesting they have this tamper-proof sticker for some reason. And then you open up the box, and you're first met with the mounting options that are available on the device. So there's like 3 different options you can see for different types of walls. And then if you open up that little package to the left, then you see the contents of the mounting kit as well as the USB-C charger. It's unusual to have a USB-C charger that plugs into a wall outlet, but that's what we have here. And the cable actually to the power outlet is pretty thick. It's really quite rugged actually. It's very interesting. If you pull off the mounting kit instructions, then that's what you see below it. And then in that is all the documentation. They're fairly thick, each of the booklets, mainly because they are written in a number of languages. Remember, Inkposter is a subsidiary of Pocketbook, which in and of itself is a European e-ink, e-reader and to a lesser degree, Eat Note-Taking Company. So it's clear that they definitely cater to a lot of the languages of Europe. And then if you pull off the top, then you can see the device itself in this kind of plastic kind of bag. And then if you take it out, there is the device itself. And then there is on the side a yellow sticker. You remove that sticker, and then you see the Inkposter slot, and you click on that, then you can see the charge port, which is there on the left, the indicator light, and then there's a button. And I'll be honest, I'm not 100% clear on the function of the button. It's kind of recessed, so it's difficult to press. It may be there to wake up the device if you need to do that manually. I was never quite clear. There is a reset button that's on the back of the device, a manual reset that is, so it's not that. So I'm not quite sure what it is. And then there's the back of the device, and you can see in those two big circles the mounting options for both portrait and landscape. This is what it looks like when you first turn on the device. Be sure to plug the device in. It really wants to start up with the charge cord connected, even though the device did come with nearly full battery life. Now, as part of the charge process, you get to select an image, and then you send it to the device, and this is what I got when I selected my image. And this was actually something that I was able to repeat. I did a factory reset at one point because I had issues on starting it up the first time around, and I got to this image again the second time. But fortunately, that particular issue of not being able to render the image was only limited to this part of the setup process. So just a little bit of a flaw there, but not one that's concerning in the big picture. So let's take a look at the application that's associated with the Inkposter itself. And here it is. We'll go ahead and click on that. And this is the first screen, which is the Discover tab. And we'll work our way from left to right here and going through this. So the Discover tab is basically their curated art gallery. And you can see by default, we're looking at all art pieces in that gallery, regardless of the size that it's associated with. So for example, down here, we see this particular piece can be either used on the 13.3 inch or the 28.5 inch. So you basically see everything. If I go ahead and click on this icon over here that reads Fit to Inkposter, then I have the ability then to filter it further. So I have the 13-inch device, so I could go ahead and just click on that, and then this Discover tab will only include pieces relevant to my particular device. Or if I just wanted to look at just portrait images for my device, I can do that as well. We'll go ahead and keep it to everything, and it's still going to recycle. Then when it comes back up, we're met with their feature item of the day. Although in this particular case, this has been the featured item for a number of days now. So I'm not quite sure exactly how often they're going to turn that over, but that's neither here nor there. You're then met with some collections. The collections section doesn't currently work. You can see there's about 5 of them. There's posters, legendary French railroads, Prince of Japan, Impressionists. So I'm actually not sure what the 5th one is. Let's click on that. Okay, Gallery 123 highlights, but unfortunately these aren't currently working. So if I click on that, it says no images. So that's a functionality I would expect Inkposter to fix fairly soon, but currently they don't. Okay, but I could heart the collection, and in theory that's going to be in the library. We'll take a look at that later and see how that works. If we back out, if we go beyond the collections, there's unfortunately a very limited ability to search for items. There's no search functionality despite what you normally associate with a magnifying glass. There's no text search, for example. There are these 5 broad categories, which is somewhat helpful, but I think there's an opportunity to be a little bit better here. And I'll show you what I mean. If I go into an image, we'll pick this image right here. Then you scroll down, what you'll notice is that they have tags related to all of their images, and you can search on the tags. So if I want to search on Baroque, I can do that, and then I have met with just Baroque images. So that functionality works really well. The problem with it is if I want to look for a tag, I have to first find an art piece that has that tag, and then I can do the search. So there's an opportunity there to be a little bit better in terms of being able to search for items. The good news, however, is that in the meantime, yes, you have to do a lot of scrolling to go through items, but you can go ahead and heart any pieces that you want, and those will appear later in the app and will be easier to access. So fortunately, they do have that favorites ability, which will allow you not to always constantly have to scroll through the device, but still an opportunity for better search functionality here. If we keep looking down below, there's a lot of great metadata here. You've got a description of the piece, you have the author, the artist's title, or the piece's title, the year it was created, what kind of item it is, in this case an oil painting, where it was done, and then any type of additional credits are associated there. So this is some of the best kind of metadata I've seen for these Eink Art devices, and so they did a really good job here. If I wanted just to send it to my device, I can click on this button, and unfortunately it won't work. Why? Because this is only for 28.5-inch devices, and mine is a 13.3. Let's go ahead and scroll down and see if we can find a 13.3. Here we go, this one. This is the image that I had issues with in the unboxing process. This is the one that I'd selected and it didn't print properly. However, if I do select it here and I send it to my Inkposter, it will print fine from here. Let's go ahead and just do that. Oh, no matching because I think I'm currently in landscape mode. So let's see if we can find a landscape mode at 13.3. Here we go. Here's one. We'll be taking a look at this later. I can say send to Inkposter. And now you can see if I had multiple Inkposters, then I could send them to multiple. I can check the ones I want and I can click send and it will send the image accordingly. So that's how that works from the Discovery tab. The Home tab is where your devices are listed. And you can see here, you can add additional devices. We won't do that now. My device is here. By default, it's the Inkposter and the size, but if you had, say, multiple 13-inch sizes, then you can always rename that. If I click on the gear icon, this is where you can rename it. You can also set whether it's in landscape or portrait mode. And then there's a handful of settings. The first setting is ghosting cleaner mode, and this is an intriguing setting. So what they're saying here is that, every once in a while, you're going to need to kind of refresh the screens. There's no ghosting, and ghosting is an after image that's on the display. What's intriguing about that, two things for me. Number one is that I haven't seen any ghosting in any of the other e-ink frames that I've worked with. So the fact that this is here and it's needed is a little bit of a surprise. The second thing, though, is that in the printing process, and we'll show an image of that later in the video where it's basically changing the image, it's refreshing the entire screen. So I don't understand how ghosting could occur when you're refreshing the screen every time you change an image. So I'm not clear on why this is needed, but it is here. In addition to that, you do have the ability to what they call remote control. And that's where if you were outside, in the field, away from wherever the device is, you can actually connect to it via their Wi-Fi network remotely. And this is how often it will check for that. And so those are the intervals. Presumably, the shorter the interval, the more the battery drain would be. You have then your Wi-Fi settings. You have some information about Inkposter, which would include where you can check for firmware. And then if you have some issues, this will send you to a web page where there are various articles that you can look at. You'll also notice the battery life of the Inkposter there as well. The current artwork is displayed here. You can click the I button to get information. So this is similar to the metadata we saw earlier. We can back out of this, and then we can also just change the artwork here. Now what's nice about doing it this way, so I'm doing it from the perspective of my device, is it automatically is only looking for landscape 13.3 inch art pieces. And so it's already filtered for your device in its current state. So that's a nice touch. If we move over to the library here, these are one of two things. It's either images that we've attached as a favorite by selecting that heart. So earlier we put a heart on this image, and now we can see it here. So you can see it's a much more abbreviated version of pieces that you select that you may want to pick later. But it's also, any type of private images that you have loaded onto the device. In my case, I'm running on a Pixel phone. I have the Google Photos app, and that's what's available to pull from. You can't pull from any other source. So you can't go to the cloud and pull image files and what have you. It's only from your camera roll that you can add images, and they would be included here. And then from this point, you can then send to Inkposter, and it basically allows you to crop the image. So I'm going to go ahead, and it always starts really small, but I can magnify it however I want to get the image just the way I want. And then I can do some additional things like rotating, etc., and crop it and then send it off to the device. So that option is available. I do find that images from a phone, as good as our phones are, don't always translate as well onto these e-ink art pieces, because they're just a little more grainy, a little more, you see a little more of the dots on it. So just be aware of that. It works. You can do photos on these devices, but they don't always look great. It really depends on your source photos, and a phone camera usually is a little bit on the weaker side. So here's an example of the collections we talked about earlier, so you can bring these over as well into your library. So the last bit is just simply your profile, and this is all very standard stuff. There's really nothing particularly unusual. This is generic information like about your account, etc., and really not a lot here of note. So that is the app for the Inkposter. So here's an example of that photo that I uploaded onto the device, and it looks okay. It's a little bit grainy. It's okay at a distance, but it definitely has more limitations than you see when you upload images that are really designed for the device. I'm going to go ahead and upload one of those images now, and we're going to see what the printing process looks like. A little bit of a forewarning, there is a lot of flashing that's involved with that for about 20 seconds or so, so just be aware of that. Let's go ahead and take a look at that process in action. And there it is. This image will be the first one that we take a little bit of a deeper look at. And for people that have watched my video, they know this is one of my favorite paintings of all time. This is, of course, Bruegel's Tower of Babel. Here is the LCD version, and you can see, of course, that the LCD version has much brighter colors, a little more vibrant than we see with the e-ink screen. But if you take that away, the e-ink version still looks really good and looks certainly as close enough to the original that without that comparison nearby, it looks fantastic. And actually, this is one of the better versions that I've seen on these e-ink devices. I'll just point one thing out in particular. These darkened areas here are representative of trees. In other versions that I've looked at this print on, it looks more like black smoke. Now, the screen itself, they're all identical. They're all e-ink screens using Spectra 6. So the difference is probably in the underlying file. But regardless, kudos to Inkposter for putting probably the best version of this art piece that I've seen so far. So here's another image, however, that I think may not have been a good selection for the curated gallery. The piece itself is quite interesting. I can definitely see why this piece has some significance and was chosen. The problem is that clearly, when you look at this piece, your eyes are immediately drawn to the reds of the watermelon. That's really the centerpiece of the art. And then your eyes then start to go elsewhere and explore the other details. That red is just way too muted in the version that eventually gets printed. I really think the piece suffers in being displayed on this technology, and I wouldn't have included it for that reason. Even though the piece itself, it certainly makes sense why they included it, I just don't think it's right for this technology. Here's an example of a professional photo and how that looks on this device. Of course, with the LCD screen, it looks brighter, a little bit shinier, but nevertheless, let me go ahead and remove that. I think this particular piece looks excellent on this device. I think the detail comes out really well. I think the coloring comes out really well. And it's just a well-designed piece for this technology. So again, an example that photographs can absolutely look good if they've got the right specifications. I should point out as well that as we're viewing these images, I do have some artificial lighting in the room, in the back, but most of the illumination you're getting on the device itself is actually from a window that's open about a yard away. So we're getting a lot of natural light. And that's where these devices really do thrive. Can you notice the images in darker environments? Yes, but you do lose a little bit of that detail. Having a nice bright room or being close to natural light is the perfect place for these types of devices. Okay, here's an example where I'm probably the most critical about the curation that Inkposter has done. Now, I'm not familiar with this particular image. I'm sure it's probably iconic and it probably makes a lot of sense from a historical perspective why it's here. But I think from a visual perspective, I think it's an absolute disaster. The way that you look at this poster, and we'll go ahead and scroll down probably with the best example, the background of the poster is kind of an off-white, a little bit of cream, and you especially get a lot here in the lower left corner. All of that is completely washed out. It's just gray in the background, a uniform gray. And I just don't think this translated really well. And you might say, well, why are you even concerned with the background? But I think the character of the background is very much part of the art piece. So this is one of those areas where I kind of think Inkposter should have said no. Maybe this is a significant piece. There's a lot of historical interest in this piece, but I think ultimately it doesn't play well with the technology and should not have been included. So this image is a famous painting. It's Napoleon crossing the Alps. And of course we see that the image is a bit darker, the red's a bit muted than the LCD image. But I actually think that this image is a triumph on this device. So let me remove the LCD image and you can just appreciate the image as it is. It looks really great. The details there, the color when you don't have the comparison of the LCD screen does pop. And I think it's just a great example because a lot of Renaissance paintings are kind of darker like this, and this just shows how the Inkposter does a really good job of displaying these. I think this is definitely a piece I'd be willing to display on this technology. The last image I wanted to show is this portrait, which is the image you may recall I tried to load in the startup phase twice, the initial time and after I did a factory reset, but image wouldn't load. So I just wanted to load this for two reasons. One is, yes, the image can load properly. It was just some quirk in the startup process that was an issue. But also I wanted to show you the piece first before I show you the LCD version. So if you look at that, the red is really nice and crisp, and you've got this background color as well that actually isn't technically accurate. Let me go ahead and share the image now, and you can see what looks more like a burgundy in the Inkposter is actually more of a crimson in the piece. Nevertheless, it still looks really good on its own. And so that's why I think this is a great example of why the color accuracy is not a concern. Colors, even though maybe not completely accurate, still look great on the device. So let's go over what I think are the notable pros and cons of the Inkposter. And we'll start with a positive. And of course, it comes down to their art gallery. There's a heavy emphasis on European works, but there's definitely art pieces from all around the world. It's a really good selection of classic items, of significance within the art world. So it's a very nicely put together gallery, particularly in terms of having a lot of significant pieces from various time frames and artists. So that's definitely one of the top strengths of this device. Most of the images look great. I showed some examples earlier about how I thought they could have been a little bit tighter on the curation, but that's the exception more than the norm. Generally speaking, the images look really good on this device, and they don't draw attention to their weaknesses, they draw attention to their strengths. The color is generally accurate. I would say accurate enough. If you really knew the underlying art piece, you might notice issues with the coloration, but in lieu of that, it doesn't call attention to itself. And it looks really good when you display pieces. That's generally not something that you're going to think about when you're looking at a piece that's being displayed. But again, if you had something side by side, or if you were really aware about the piece, you might notice a little bit of issues with color. But I think that's a minor issue. I think the device does a really good job. It can display, I think, something like 50,000 colors, and that really looks good on this device. The battery life lasts a long time. I can't actually measure the battery life. It's very difficult to do it on devices like this. The one previous example where I was able to measure battery life was when there was a scheduling function, and then you can let that happen and then measure the results. You don't have that here. But Inkposter says, it's good for about a year, maybe even a little bit more. It's all dependent on how often you change images. And my experience with the technology and other devices shows that the battery life will definitely be great. Your mileage may vary, again, depending on how often you switch pieces, but it's going to last a long time, and you're not going to have to think about changing batteries that often. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like how often do you have to change batteries in a AA battery smoke detector. That's kind of what we're talking about. It happens, but it's rare. So for the most part, you won't have to worry about that. The frame design is really solid. It feels solid. It's a little bit on the heavier side, but it certainly exudes quality, and everything about the physical aspects of the device is really well done. The mounting system is really nice. The other folks that have released products just put brackets on the back, which is fine. That's how most art is hung. But having their kind of nub system where you can mount it on that or switch quickly from landscape to portrait is really well done. And I think that's a little bit higher quality than what we've seen from other folks that have released devices. The artist metadata is the best I've seen in any app. You really do learn a little bit about the art. You're going to have to go elsewhere if you really want to go deep into interpretation and what have you. But this is a nice starting point. This is a nice bridge. You know the name of the piece, you know the artist, the time period, and so on. I think they did a really good job with the metadata. And then the packaging is really nice. Previously, I felt like the reflection frames packaging, for example, could have been a little bit better because some of the mats were kind of curved. It's still usable, but you would like them to have been flat, and that was part of the fault of the packaging. The device was fine. The Allura Tech had just too much packaging. I mean, I guess that's a good problem to have. But it's nice. I think Inkposter did a nice balance between those two, and it was the best packaged device I've seen so far. I kind of wish it was a little more recyclable. Some of the internals are not recyclable, the padding, but outside of that, kudos for the packaging. Okay, but let's now focus on the cons. What are the negatives of this device? And first and foremost, it is expensive. To put this into context, the list price of the 13-inch Inkposter device is twice, at $700, twice the amount than either the Allura Tech or the reflection frame. And that doesn't even include the fact that you have to use FedEx shipping with Inkposter, which generally is more expensive as well. So the end price ends up being even more than twice than those other options. Is the device twice as good as the other options? Well, some of that is just down to preferences, so it's a hard question to answer. But the number one issue I had when I did my other reviews of these 13-inch devices at $350 is that they were too expensive. This is twice of that, so clearly a weakness of the Inkposter line. The app, I'm using the phrase half-baked. This was kind of a legacy from when I was starting to think about the review, and there were a lot of issues with the app. Some of those have been solved. So I don't know if half-baked is quite right, but I really think more development is needed. For example, the fact that you can't schedule images like you can with the Allura. I thought that functionality was going to be available, and I would expect that functionality at this price point. So very disappointing it's not there. Interesting side note, they do have a slideshow option when they're displaying at these trade shows. So they can certainly do it, and their app is geared to be able to do it. But right now, that's just for display purposes in these shows, not on the consumer app. So hopefully that's a gap they'll fill soon, but it's missing as of this viewing. Hard to browse art. We kind of walked through that as we went through the app. They have the ability for better search functionality if you can just start your search based on the tags they've already attached to each piece, but that functionality isn't there. So you have to find a piece with a tag that you like, and then you click on that tag, and then you can search. I thought they could have done a better job with that. I will say this though, when you scroll through the gallery, it does load fairly quickly. Compared to Reflection Frame, which is a little bit slower to load images, Inkposter was pretty good in that regard, but the Reflection Frame has an ability to search, and Inkposter doesn't. So I just think there's opportunity here. I'm calling it limited image uploads, but what I mean is that all of the devices that I've reviewed thus far have the ability to upload photos. That's not unusual. But the other devices I reviewed, other than the Inkposter, could download files as well. So I could go on the internet, I could see an art piece I liked, make sure it had, good pixelation and it would translate well, bring it down onto those apps, and then load it onto the device. Not here. The only way you can load images is through your camera roll. So I guess you could take a picture of an image on the internet and then load it into your camera roll, but it's more limited than we're used to with other participants, and yet again at a premium price. The app is required for use. Now this is something I haven't talked about in previous reviews but could have mentioned, particularly with the Reflection Frame. But a number of folks have posted on my previous reviews that their concern is you're paying a lot of money for a device and you're really depending that that app is still available. And once that app goes away, you can't use the device anymore. That's definitely true for the Reflection Frame, and it's true here as well. I think the Allura allows you to load devices locally and you can manually control them just on the frame. So I think you have some independence there with the app. And the upcoming Blooming 8 will also allow for that. They're very explicit about that. So if their app goes out of business or whatever, you're still able to use the device. Inkposter, you're dependent that that app continues to exist because there's no other way to engage your device to change photos or to upload new photos and what have you. Images are a bit dark, and I should point out that this is a criticism of the technology. So this is true of all these e-ink devices. They are darker than the original. We saw examples of that when we went through some of the images earlier. So that's definitely something to be aware of, and that limits certain type of images. You won't be able to use them because they just lose something in that darkness, but most images are fine. Whites don't always render well. We saw an example of that as well. Again, this is true of all of the ink devices. So not everything will display well, and that's a limitation. It doesn't affect a lot of images. You won't notice that most of the time, but sometimes you will. And then the last thing is that the frame and the mat are what they are. It's a little different on the Reflection Frame, for example. You've got choices of different types of mats. You can also select one of two frame types. Allura also has a choice of mats. The Blooming 8, I believe, is having some ability to use Kia frames instead. So other devices allow you some functionality around changing the mats and the frames. Not here. So if you have, for example, in my house, I have antique white painted walls. So when you have a white mat, particularly a thicker white mat against that type of background, it really kind of sticks out and calls attention in a negative way. So you have to make sure that you're hanging this device in a place where that crisp white mat isn't going to kind of clash with the background. Now, in tighter walls, that shouldn't be an issue. In my case, it was just a large wall, and that's where a white mat didn't look very good. But anyway, that's just an example of why that could be a limitation. It really depends on where you're going to hang the device. But okay, so having gone over all of this material, the pros and cons, and etc., what are my overall thoughts? Well, let me start off with the first day that I got this device, the day I unboxed it and I started to work with it. I hated it. I found all sorts of issues with it, whether it was trouble with the startup process, where that one image wouldn't load, as we talked about in the unboxing section, or I would have issues connecting with Wi-Fi. I had to restart, factory restart the frame. I was having so many issues. And then you go to the app, and the app is buggy. There were a number of issues with the app that I didn't talk about in this video that I experienced on that first day, simply because they've since been fixed in an update. And I should point out, I'm filming this as of September 20th, so who knows, maybe there'll be additional updates between filming and releasing this video. But regardless, I did not like this device, and in no way did I feel that it justified the price point. Fortunately, they did get that app fix in. I had time to kind of think about it, to look at additional images, and to kind of temper my initial reactions. And I did feel more favorable toward the device with that reflection. First off, the hardware is really good. I can make the case that the hardware is better than what we've seen so far from Reflection Frame and from Aluratech. So I think from a hardware front, it's a solid device, and I think that they do justify some premium for that. I think that the collection of artwork is good. It's not my favorite collection. I actually think that Reflection Frame has a better curated gallery, but that's just my personal preference. I wouldn't, take that with a grain of salt. But still, they have a solid gallery here with the Inkposter, and there's a lot of interesting pieces. There's some pieces that I just threw up, just kind of on a lark, and thought, oh, actually, that looks really good. I don't think I would have normally liked that piece, but now that I see it on this device, I might actually display that at some point. So I'm getting warmed up to the curated gallery that they've provided, and I'm finding more value as I'm using the device over time. But the question still remains, is it worth this massive premium for this device? And again, a hard question to answer, and that will vary from person to person. However, I will say this. Prior to getting this device, my thought process was I would also purchase the very expensive 28-inch device. And the reason for that is that there was some additional technology involved with that device, which is supposed to make the images look nicer. So I wanted to take a look at that. And they also have actually some nice wall space that I think a 28-inch device would fit perfectly in. So on a personal level, I had a lot of interest in that, but was a little concerned about this massive price. I think it's $2,400 for that size. And at this point, I think I'm going to back off on purchasing that. I think that's just too much money. The Inkposter is nice, but those other devices like Reflection Frame and Aluratech, they're really nice too. And right now, some of them have a little bit better functionality, whether it's the search functionality of Reflection Frame or it's the scheduling of images of the Aluratech. I do hope and think that Inkposter can solve some of these issues in future software updates and then justify from an app perspective a premium as well. But it is an uphill climb to justify, as nice as these devices are, to justify the expensive price of the Inkposter. So that's kind of where my general thoughts are. I like it. I think there's a lot to like here, but is it enough to like for the price point? I didn't have a problem with the price point for the other devices at around $350 when other people did. Now I'm starting to feel the price point just like people did in comments before. So that's kind of where I'm at in my general thinking of this overall. I think it's a company worth taking a look at because there's opportunity for them to improve on what they have. And I expect them to do that. So maybe my mind will change, as they add, better search functionality, the ability to schedule images, and maybe even more features that would justify that premium value. But right now, I feel like they might have released this just a little bit early. Maybe they were feeling the pressure from competition. Maybe it was getting too close to the holiday season. They just don't feel like they were quite ready to release it yet. And so that's what we've got today, with the hopes that it will improve tomorrow. Okay, that's my review. If you have any questions about that, please pop it in the chat and I'll try my best to answer. Otherwise, I hope to see you in future videos, and I hope you have a nice day.